Meow. It's so sad. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights for true scary cat kidnap stories. The Cat Killer. If you're from England, more notably from London, you may have heard of the Croydon cat killer. This arsehole lures cats towards him and then brutally kills them, then even removes the microchip and places the body near to the family home so that the shock level is higher. I don't live in Croydon. I live in an area of southeast London called Bexley. I have 2 cats. A couple days ago, a road away from mine, someone stumbled on the remains of a black cat missing its head in a skip. Some believed it to be foxes, even though I don't know many foxes who carry knives around with them and are able to cut clean lines. The police are even pushing this off in Croydon as foxes. The cat was taken to our local vet, and the vet there determined it was done by a person and not by another animal. The police finally took notice down here. Only I always call my cats from the back garden when it's dinner time. And tonight, when I shouted for my oldest cat, Alfie, I heard a few seconds later, Alfie, from the alleyway. My cats are both with me currently, and they aren't leaving anytime soon. To the sick fuck who wasn't shown enough love as a child by mommy and daddy, know that if I ever meet you and catch you, I will skin you alive and hang you from a tree. I promise. The Hoarder House and the Missing Cats. My cat has been missing for 2 weeks now. I raised him by hand. He's a little mama's boy and he never leaves my side for more than an hour, so when I noticed he didn't come to bed that first night, I immediately knew something was wrong. For what I'm about to tell you to make sense, you need to understand that I love this damn cat so much. I have a tattoo of him on my chest next to my heart. He saved my life when I was in a bad mental place, and I would do anything to find him, so keep that in mind as you read this. When I realized he was missing, I posted his photo on every missing animals page I could find. I printed flyers, I went to the SPCA and every vet in town to look for him. I didn't find him. Last night someone told me that it's mating season for cats now. I live on the bottom side of the planet, so it's springtime now and it's sweltering, and that intact males would often chase neutered males like my kimchi off of their territory. They suggested I go to door in my neighborhood and ask people if I can look under their sheds and in their crawl spaces, as cats who are attacked tend to go into hiding. I rose bright and early this morning and set out on my cat hunt. I dragged my very patient boyfriend Benjamin along to protect me from any creeps. I printed out another batch of flyers to take with, in case I had to prove the legitimacy of my operation. Very few people actually let us onto their property. There were a few kind old ladies who took some flyers and they offered to distribute at Bible study. One lady even offered us an ice-cold glass of water, but most neighbors just squinted cautiously at our sweaty hands and foreheads as we tried to desperately persuade them of our innocence. At least take a flyer, sir, please? By noon, we still haven't had any trace of him. We sat down on a sidewalk under a tree. It was like the sun was screaming at us along with the cicadas. I looked down on my legs and saw little beads of sweat trickle through the red dust that had by now collected in a thick layer of my calves. Kiddo, hey girlie, what you sitting there look so droopy for? A middle-aged man sporting a mullet, beer belly, and some Croc sandals was waving at me from his open garage. His house looked like it was probably very snazzy back in the 70s, but then again, this whole neighborhood looks kind of like that. He seemed nice though. Even though he wasn't wearing a shirt, I explained my situation. Lost cat, eh? I see. I'll look up in my roof again. Them kits like to crawl up there and make a ruckus. He studied the flyer carefully, taking on a pair of reading glasses from the back pocket of his jean shorts. I've seen this cat of yours, he's a darling. I've seen the others around here beat him up bad though, screaming and howling, chasing him into that yard across from here. I looked where he pointed. I would have never noticed it if he hadn't pointed it out. You couldn't really see the house for all the shrubbery. In front of it was a tall whitewashed wall with a rusted gate. It was clear someone tried to burglar-proof the gate with some planks at some time. It was now hanging by its last hinge. I thanked the nice mullet man for the intel and watched him enter his home, closing his door and blinds behind him. My boyfriend and I approached the house across the street. The sidewalk was burst open from years of neglect, giving way to a forest of prickly weeds. I looked for a doorbell or a mailbox, but there was none. I peeked behind the rusty gate. The yard was barren except for the tall weeds. Everywhere there were piles of rubble, bricks, and planks. Perhaps a renovation project that was never completed. The wooden part of the front door was nailed and bolted, but the glass panels were mostly all missing. A scared cat could slip in there, easy. I stepped into the yard. To my left, I saw an old metal shed, half rusted to hell. The top was covered by green plastic shade netting. A makeshift door made of plywood stood open, revealing the inside of the shed. The netting above made the inside glow dark green. Babe, it's trespassing," Benjamin called hesitantly, still standing in the street. "Maybe we should just leave a flyer." I ignored him. This place is clearly abandoned. Trespassing is the least of crimes I would commit to find my cat. Movement from inside the shed caught my eye. "Kimchi! Here, kitty, kitty! Here, boy!" I called. The creature scurried away. It was a rat. A few more darted into the shadows. "Oh, God," I exclaimed, feeling itchy all over. "I hope he hasn't eaten any of those rats. I'm not gonna go any closer to the shed." I called by his name a few more times, but to no avail. I tried looking into the house, but newspaper and black bags covered the windows. I would have to find a way around. I finally persuaded my boyfriend to join me in my crime. To be honest, I was getting pretty freaked out, and I needed to hold his hand. We walked around the right side of the house, waving mosquitoes, flies, and gnats out of the way. When we got to the back of the house, the smell of feces hit me like a frying pan in the face. I couldn't see the source of the smell, though. What I did see were piles and piles of junk. Old furniture, rubble, boxes, black bags everywhere. In the middle was an empty swimming pool. The sides were cracked with grass and weeds growing out, and at the bottom was a puddle of horrible brown sludge, almost obscured completely by gnats and flies. I called desperately to my cat. I had hoped he would be hiding here, but the more I see of this place, the more I hope he isn't here. The smell of feces was so strong. I walked further into the property, calling out to him. I came round a corner in front of me. I could see the windows, but these ones weren't boarded up, and they were open. But as I came closer, I realized that if he was indeed in the house, I wouldn't be able to get him. The inside of the house was stacked almost to the ceiling, full of the same kind of junk that was all over the backyard. This was the type of thing I thought I only ever see on TLC. I could see more rats running around inside. Then the smell hit us again. "Jesus, this place is an absolute shithole," I said to Benjamin, covering my mouth. That's when I turned around and saw him, an old man sitting on a plastic lawn chair in the shadow of the house. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, sir. I was just looking for my cat. We're gonna leave right now," I exclaimed, panicking and incredibly embarrassed. He had scared the shit out of me. He said nothing. He only studied us with his eyes. He was old but not ancient, and skinny and sickly, kind of skinny, with gaunt cheeks and deep eye sockets. He was wearing a neat outfit, polo shirt tucked into somewhat pressed pants, but despite this I had a suspicion that he'd been wearing the same pair of clothes for a long time, as it was covered in stains. I approached him cautiously with a flyer. Have you seen my cat?" He stared at it for at least 5 seconds, then slowly stretched out an arm and took the paper from me, studying it further. I stood there awkwardly waiting for a reply, but he said nothing. Instead, he lowered his head, pressed the page onto his forehead, as if to wipe the sweat from his brow, but he kept it there, crumpling it against his face. And then he started to growl like a dog. He was growling at me. I didn't know what to do, so I just started apologizing profusely for disturbing him. For some reason, I tried to take the offending flyer back from him, as if I was afraid he might harm the image of my cat. I wanted to rip it out of his hands. I was so freaked out and scared at this point, I don't really remember why I wanted to do that, or how close I came to this man. But Benjamin grabbed me by the arm and half running pulled me to the front of the house, then ushered me into the street. When we were safely under the tree of the Mullet Man's side of the street, he swung me around and looked deep into my eyes, as if checking that I still had all my marbles. We walked home in silence. I hope my cat comes home, or someone finds him and calls. Before this afternoon, I was afraid that my cat was hit by a car or something. Now I might be afraid he's hiding in that house with that man, and the feces and the rats. I'm freaking out even more than I was before. I didn't even know that house was there before, and I hope I never see that man again. Creepy cat toucher. Apologies in advance. This is a little bit short, but still really creepy. In high school, I had a friend I'll call Mary, who had a complicated and weird home life. She was separated from a fraternal twin sister at birth, and they were adopted into separate families that both had serious issues. Anyway, this story in particular is when I went to her house when she was living with her adopted dad. It was kind of a shady house and neighborhood, and her dad was a shady guy too. They lived in a small, dirty duplex, and her dad worked at a PLS not too far from there. They had a cat who had some really weird behavioral issues, like it would try to claw your arm off if you even dare touch it, and although it seemed to trust Mary, I had a feeling something was really off about that cat. On this particular day, I was at Mary's house and it was getting into the late evening when her dad came home and I met him for the first time. Mary had already hinted that he was a weird guy, but I wasn't entirely sure what she meant by that. He said hi and we chatted for a bit, and then he went into the bedroom and took the cat with him. The next thing I heard burned into my memory forever, and it still creeps me out to this day. I heard him say, "Good kitty," over and over in a hushed tone, while the cat screeched. Mary had tears in her eyes. I was in partial denial at the time, but I knew what was happening in the bedroom. So, creepy cat molester, let's never meet again. I want to pet your cat. Alright, this happened several weeks ago, and it sure as hell creeped me out. Something happened to the plumbing in my apartment my boyfriend and I are currently living in. We called a plumber and he was going to come over at around 6-ish on a Tuesday. It was my day off, so I would be there if I was a little early, but my boyfriend got home exactly at 6 p.m., so I was home alone all morning. Before I get any further into the story, I will tell you now I do have a dog Rottweiler and a cat Siamese. Alright, so it was around 8 in the morning when I heard several knocks on the door. I was not expecting anyone and was still in my pajamas at this point, but I went to check it anyways. I looked through the people and saw a man with large scruffy beard and a baseball cap standing there. I noticed he had a toolbox, so I opened the door a crack. "Hello?" I said awkwardly. "Hello, ma'am, I'm the plumber," he said with a grin on his face. I didn't really question it before I let him in, although he was hours early. I led him to the washroom with a problem, then went to change into something more appropriate. After I finished changing, I went to check up on the man, whose name I didn't even get yet, and found him in the front room. He was crouched over the dog bed, where my cat was currently napping. This was off, and I knew it. I cleared my throat to notify him of my presence. He didn't even turn to look at me. "I want to pet your cat," he said a little too loudly. I was not comfortable, nor was I going to let this happen. "No, could you just please fix the plumbing?" I said firmly. No, I want to pet your cat. I need to pet the cat." "I think that you should leave," I said. I was not dealing with his obsession with cats. He stood up and turned towards me. After a moment of him staring at me, his eyes became very wide. "You look like a cat. Can I pet you?" At this point, I was contemplating grabbing my purse, pulling out the pepper spray that Rose had given me, and spraying this dude straight in the face. I was thoroughly disturbed and creeped out. "I'm going to ask you one more time to leave," I said loudly. At this point, my dog walked into the room, and although he couldn't hurt a fly, his appearance must have freaked the man out. After eyeing my dog for a minute, he looked back at me and said, "K," and he left. He walked right out of the apartment. I locked the door behind him and looked out the peephole. He stood there for about 2 minutes before speed walking down the hall, toolbox in hand. I called up my boyfriend at work and told him everything. He came home early because he didn't want me alone. Although I insisted I was fine. The best part, at 6:30 a man showed up at our door. He was the real plumber. So who was the man from earlier? How did he know I called for a plumber? Some things we'll never know. So, cat-obsessed so-called plumber, let's not meet again. Dying cat in the cemetery. This took place about 2 years ago. I used to live 3 streets over from a massive 300-acre graveyard. My neighborhood was divided into 2 sections, one of which is a grid system, and the other half is a twisty, secluded area. The graveyard spanned half of the grid system in my neighborhood, which was the area that I lived in. I had a close friend who lived 2 streets from the graveyard on the other end. We spent almost every Saturday at each other's houses, mostly sleeping over. This night, at around 3 in the morning, I woke up his mom by laughing. She came downstairs and kicked me out. Normally, when I left his house, I would walk to my house on the street at the bottom of the cemetery. It was a straight shot to my house. As I am walking, I hear what sounds like a cat in a huge amount of pain coming from inside the graveyard. I decide to go try and find it so I can possibly help it out. I can tell it's pretty far inside the cemetery. I hop the fence and begin looking. I get to the center of the graveyard, and I can tell I'm about 30 to 40 yards away from the cat by now. By now, the cat is screeching and howling. It doesn't sound like it has moved since I first heard it crying in the street. As I close in on the spot I think it's in, the screeching stops. I stop in my tracks, and something feels very off to me. Then a guy wearing a hood walks out from behind a tomb, about 50 feet in front of me. After a few seconds of staring at each other, he makes a cat noise. I gasp. He starts to run at me. I turn around and take off sprinting. I look over my shoulder, after maybe 30 seconds of running, and he has stopped chasing me and is walking back towards the tomb. I make it out of the cemetery, jogging home now. After about a minute, I hear the cat noises start up again. Coastal Feline Massacre. I grew up in Lawdale, CA. I lived there until I was 9 years old, and then we moved, thankfully. The town smelt of urine, and most of the people I met were shady. We had neighbors in a front house. It was two families sharing it, a black couple with their niece and a Taiwanese family who were very nice, inviting me to play basketball with their son. The black family, others on our street, and even teachers would call me mulatto under their breath if I was alone. I am Norwegian and black. If any educated person heard my grandfather speak, they would know this immediately. He was a victim of World War II, sent to America by Sweden at age 5 to work, almost molested by older ship workers till he was older. He was far from a racist old man and wanted his granddaughter to grow up normally, warning about America and America's pride in its past, telling me to forgive Germany because they are ashamed, and issued an apology to our surviving relatives. Sadly, he couldn't protect me from gruesome reality. One week, I noticed almost all my cats would disappear for a while. 2 stray came back in the most horrifying condition you could imagine, or at least to my young mind at the time. They were poorly dissected and dumped on our porch. We saw they were alive and brought them to the vet. The vet put them down immediately. I cannot describe how I felt. I felt the average emotions, but I think something snapped that day. I had such dark thoughts towards the unknown killer. That wasn't the worst case. My cat named Christmas had been run over, organs sprawled out in a bag that was discarded before I could see. It was my grandpa and aunts who witnessed this. They called my grandmother on our day out. I spent that next morning mourning with my head in the black bag and telling Mom, who was in tears watching me from the back door, she was still breathing. She wasn't. My mom and uncle went to the cemetery by the old bowling alley, South Bay Galleria Mall, and I believe the middle school is down the street of Faces, to bury her. After a month later, my mom was called a bitch by the black couple's niece. She didn't care till they called me a bastard mule. My mom had enough and started yelling at them. I can't imagine my mother going off. My mom gave me the details a week ago. Someone called the police, and she was informed that the husband killed many cats. The two said something like, "Fuck that cat." The officers were appalled and ran a background check. The guy would kill small animals, and he was wanted for other crimes as well. I understand she hid this from me for a long time. I can't do anything but share this to get it over already. Those thoughts have come back. I've suppressed it for a long time. Our friend offered to dig up her bones and wired them to look like she was sleeping, but they are probably gone by now, as I am in my late teens. So to the guy who robbed me of a normal childhood, you better pray we never meet again.